वेलकम टू आवर नेशन स्टेट डायलॉग सीरीज राष्ट्र राज्य संवाद श्रृंखला में आपका स्वागत है. आई एम डॉक्टर गीता कोचा, moderator for today's discussion. Today it's our pleasure to have with us Professor S.D. Muni. Though he does not need any introduction, everyone knows about him and he's so very famous. But for those who are not into China field or international relations and who really don't know about, who these professors are, just a brief introduction. Professor Muni is an emeritus professor of JNU. He's member of IDSA MP IDSA Executive Council for nearly 40 years. He taught and conducted and supervised research in international relations and South Asian studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. That is basically from 1974 to 2006. He also did the same research and supervision in National University of Singapore from 2008 to 2013. Banaras Hindu University from 1985 to 86, and the University of Rajasthan in 1972 to 73. He served as India's special envoy to Southeast Asian countries on UNSC Reforms 2005 and represented India's Minister of External Affairs at the 50th anniversary of that. Celebrations of the Paris Peace Conference held in Phnom Penh, Kampuchea. He was also India's ambassador to Lao People's Democratic Republic from 1997 to 1999. And Professor Muni was nominated to be the first ever constituted National Security Advisory Board of India during 1990 and 1991. He was the founding executive member of the Regional Center of Strategic Studies, Sri Lanka, Colombo. And in 2005, he was bestowed with Sri Lanka Ratna. That is the Sri Lanka's highest national honor for a foreign national. The Institute of National Security Studies, Sri Lanka, Colombo, offered him affiliation as Honorary Distinguished Fellow in 2016. And he has published numerous papers and books, and anybody who is interested can just type in the name and you'll find numerous books he has published. But today we have invited him to discuss his very latest book, Dabbling in Diplomacy, Authorized and Otherwise, Recollections of a Non-Career Diplomat. I mean, this is a very fascinating work, I find, for academicians as well as to, for the bureaucrats to read into and find out insights about he and his, interactions with the bureaucracy as well as the leaders, and how, an academician can play an interactive role in, foreign policy and other issues. So welcome to our Nation State Dialogue series, sir. Okay, so let me begin by asking, just to give us a brief idea about your book. What is it all about and what motivated you to write this book? Of course, we as a reader would want to read a lot about your life and your interactions. But what was your, motivation to write this book?
Well, there was simple motivation. Firstly, I was not cut out for a diplomatic service, but I had this experience. And I think this is a different category of people who go as diplomats. In fact, in all 5 JNU professors have become diplomats, but none of them wrote their experiences. So I thought I better write and let people know how the non-professionals work in this kind of a professional activity. So this was the main purpose of it. Behind, I thought I have also been deeply involved, particularly in Sri Lanka and Nepal, but also in other South Asian countries. And I should share my experience for students and colleagues who, if at all, it can be some advantages to them. I think these were the 2 simple motivations. And since, we have earned our bread and butter by reading, writing, and speaking, I thought this is the best thing I could do, and so I did it.
Yeah, I mean, it's marvelous for any scholar who's, aspiring to be a diplomat in a career, or maybe just be a scholar and, represent as an ambassador. I think there's a lot of insights into this book.
Well, I may submit that I did not aspire to be a diplomat. As you will see in my book, it suddenly came in a way because I did not plan it, I did not work for it. That's what it is.
So can you just give some insights some crucial points of your book, which our viewers would be very interested in knowing, or you think that they should be reading at least that sections of it to understand what is that
No,
you want to really convey in this book?
I've been deeply involved in Nepali politics and has been a great supporter of democracy and republican system there, not only from now, but from the late 60s. And I've seen many things happening before me, and I said, it is better to share it with them. And two of the things are very, very important. First is the democratic struggle against a monarchy which has been assertive. And second was the mainstreaming of the Maoist, which was a terrible insurgency in Nepal, which killed so many people. I think the killing records are very different, but we can talk about it later. And these two experiences, I thought, to my mind, were unique for me, and I must put them down. Then in Sri Lanka, it happened that even before becoming president, President Chandrika became a friend. And when she became president, I had a much closer view of what was happening politically in Sri Lanka. Though we started reading Sri Lanka much earlier, in fact, way back in 1974-75, I wrote my first paper on Kachativu Island, how India's policy, with one of my senior colleagues called Urmila Fadnis. So and then my wife started working for her PhD on a Sri Lanka subjects. So we happened to visit Sri Lanka several times. So these were in the background, and I thought Sri Lanka was also important. In addition to that, I must say that almost all the leaders and heads of the governments in South Asia, I have had a chance to run into them in one form or the other. Maldives, Bangladesh, Pakistan. I have even a book presented to me by General Ziaul Haq in one of the conferences and seminars. I have had almost 3 one-to-one meetings with the Bhutan king, the previous one, father of the present king. So I thought these are, I never planned for them, but they came in the course of my research and teaching. And therefore, I thought my colleagues and my students must know about them. So that was I think these are the important aspects of the book. Nepal experience is important for me, and Sri Lanka experience is important for me. But they are all, informal ones. As you see in the title of my book, I say authorized and otherwise. So these were the otherwise diplomatic experiences. They were not authorized. And then I got these two opportunities to be ambassador in Laos to begin with, and also a special envoy for lobbying for India's UN Security Council membership. So these were very different experiences in a way, but very helpful so far as the study of international relations in Asia is concerned, which has been my forte. I've been studying neighbors, both immediate and extended neighbors. So, I think these are the aspects. So one can contrast the formal experience as a diplomat with an informal experience in diplomacy. And there were occasions where I did something which actually went into the policy. For instance, in one of the meetings, as an academic, I was called by MEA with other people to have consultations on SARC should happen. And I suggested that we must have SARC Parliament, SARC University, and SARC Fellowships. SARC Parliament idea, they said it is too far, too ambitious, too unrealistic. But SARC University, as you know, later on it was established. And SARC Fellowships were also established. Unfortunately, the fellowships programs were given to the UGCs of respective countries for administration. And UGCs have messed it up. So you find that it did not really function and did not really grow afterwards. So it was unfortunate. Secondly, in one of the informal discussions when Prime Minister Gujral had taken me along to Sri Lanka, and we were discussing with Chandrika and Gujral and the Foreign Minister of Sri Lanka, when I mentioned that why not have India-Sri Lanka Foundation on the basis of India-Nepal Foundation, as we had BP Koirala Foundation. So I suggested have a Bandaranaike Foundation between India and Sri Lanka. But Chandrika said, no, I don't want to drag my father's name in it. But the idea is good and we must have India-Sri Lanka Foundation. So India-Sri Lanka Foundation first note was prepared by me, which was given to that joint commission meeting, and they adopted it. And eventually, after Gujarat had gone, I think during Atal Bihari Vajpayee's government, India-Sri Lanka Foundation was established, which is still working to promote cultural and academic contacts between the two countries. So I think I find these were minor, small, but to my mind, very important contributions to the policy which India was conducting in the neighborhood. So I think these are the aspects of the book which I would like to underline.
Yeah, I mean, these are significant contributions, but as you were also there when Ambassador Sibal, our Chancellor, was saying that you don't have to be a scholar to be an ambassador. There is a contrast between what you practically do and what you theoretically do. So it's not necessarily you have to have those theoretical knowledge. But having said that, I mean, I will come back to your monarchy thing later. You just mentioned about the Nepalese leaders with whom you had direct contacts, and especially in your book, you have also mentioned about contacts with Prachanda and Baburam Bhattarai, who were underground leaders at that point of time. And you also mentioned in your book, that when you were meeting these underground leaders, there were Indian agencies which were going to JNU VC at that point of time and complaining against why are you interacting with them, or something like the kind of interactions that you have is not very good and all of that. So how did you manage to overcome those pressures from the university where you are working, and you are trying to really work for the government, for India, and trying to promote the relations between India and Nepal, as well as deal with relations which is really having troubles in Nepal, because as you just mentioned, there were so many people killed during the Maoist revolution. So how is that your interest to make peace in Nepal versus your own job pressures collided, and how did you manage all of that?
Well, Geetaji, it came, I mean, accidentally. I did not quite plan it. And it was done informally, like you are a scholar, and I'm sure you meet many of the Chinese leaders by way of interviews, by talking to them, or Chinese policymakers, let us put it this way. That's what I was doing, and I started in Kathmandu because my PhD subject was foreign policy of Nepal. And when I went there, one of my mentors, Mr. Ram Nivas Mirza, who was a union minister under Mrs. Gandhi, the year is 1967. I went to Nepal and he gave me an introduction letter to Raj Bahadur, who was India's ambassador in Kathmandu, that if you have any problem, he will help you. So I took that introduction letter and gave it to Raj Bahadur, and Raj Bahadur was very helpful and said, okay, whatever problems you have, let us know. And then fine, one day he called me and he said, can you carry a message? You have been talking to Girja Koirala. Can you carry some message to Girja Koirala? So I took that message to Girja Koirala. That was regarding the release of BP Koirala, 67, 68. And King was trying to release, and there were some conditions and not a lot of negotiations going between the two as to what conditions he should be released. BP Koirala should not stay in Nepal or should not speak against the panchayat system, so on and so forth. So I carried about half a dozen or more messages between the Indian embassy and Girja Babu. And this is how Girja Babu became a friend. And when he became a friend, he took me to Biratnagar also, to Koirala Nivas. I stayed with him for about a week to 10 days. So I came in contact with many other Nepali Congress leaders. So this is how my interaction is started. Now, I was working on foreign policy, but here I was dragged into the domestic politics of Nepal. And the process of contacts went on actually. Then I came back and JNU. In JNU, since I had, talking about BP's release, BP got released and came to India. So I asked him if he would like to come and visit us. So I had a chance of hosting BP Koirala and this communist leader Shrestha, who set up the Communist Party in Nepal. Rishikesh Shah I met because of foreign policy and others. So I had contacts with them also, and that led to far more contacts so far as political leadership in Nepal was concerned. So this is how it happened in case of Nepal. I have told you about Sri Lanka, that Chandrika was almost abandoned by the Sri Lankan leadership, and Premadasa and others were in power, and she was somewhere in France and England doing her studies. And we ran into each other in a conference on Sri Lanka. And somehow she appreciated the point of view I was saying about the solution of the ethnic problem. So we came in contact with each other. And then one day I got a letter from her saying, I want to visit India. I was the head of the center in South Asia in JNU. And I said, you be our guest and deliver lectures to the students on Sri Lanka, which will be useful. Because she and her husband, Vijay Kumaratunga, had fought against the ethnic politics and stood by India's approach in many ways. So I invited her. She was our guest. And then she went to Sri Lanka and contested elections, became president. So, that relationship again became continued As a result of these relations, I may tell you that we had 2 or 3 of the ministers from Bhutan coming and lecturing my students when I invited them. KP Oli had come couple of times to my students and sat down with them and talked to them when he was a political leader, but not holding any office. So this is how the context is spread out. And there was no conflict in my studies because I was still writing on Nepal. I was still writing on South Asian affairs. I was still writing on Sri Lanka. So this is how it happened. And I did not see any clash either, or any what you call planning that I must go and get this done or get it not done. Now, when, as I said, Rishikesh and others were meeting me, it was Rishikesh who introduced me to Baburam Bhattrai. And Baburam Bhattrai was a student in JNU, not my student, but he was a student in another center of regional development. Now, there he was a student, and Rishikesh, when he was visiting me, called Baburam. And so Baburam came to my home in JNU, and this is where we established our contacts. And at that time, Baburam was not a Maoist. He was working for the human rights with Rishikesh Shah. So, and he was also working, mobilizing support for Nepal. He was very unhappy that the Nepalese who come and serve in India are being ill-treated. They are security guards, or they are cooks, or they are servants in home, and they are not treated well. So we had a lot of that kind of an interaction, and he became a friend. But later on, he turned into a Maoist leader. And one fine morning, after years of no communication with us, he suddenly knocked at my door and I said, we are being misunderstood in India. We want to explain our position to the Indian leaders. And I said, are you willing to lay down arms? He did not say it clearly, but I could see that there was a war fatigue amongst the Maoists. And they really wanted to, what you call, have a peaceful way out. As you know, they were also talking to the king for a peaceful way out, but did not happen that. So I said I explored and tried to get them in touch with the Indian leaders, and this is how I was dubbed as a Maoist. I had nothing to do with that. My whole purpose was that they were laying down arms, which was in the interest of Nepal, which was in the interest of India. So why should the two sides not work with each other? And it is in the interest of humanity because it will bring about peace. Now, Maoist, at that time, I realized that they were more of a political group, and they were forced into the kind of insurgency which they had. And of course, they are being blamed for 18,000 killings and all that. But I have seen some of the Nepali records, which say that out of the 18,000 killing, 2/3 of the killing was done by the Nepal army. 1/3 of the killing was done by the Maoists. Now, not many people talk about it because, it is not politically correct to talk and say that the Maoists were not the bigger killers and the Nepal army was the bigger killer. But these are the situations in the evolving politics there, and also in India, the kind of attitudes which are there. So this is how, I mean, it's a short story of a long experience that I got, even as an academic, I got into contacts with the political leaders and got more and more involved into, not involved, I mean, watching closely what is happening at the domestic political level in these countries.
But I mean, these are the interesting facts, and we can just go on listening to your experiences and things. But you devoted a lot of efforts on providing your understanding about this neighborhoods, Sri Lanka, Pakistan, even Bhutan and Sri Lanka, Nepal, to the Ministry of External Affairs of India, right? And you also spoke about the lessons you learned becoming a non-career diplomat. So do you see any change in what the bureaucracy was then and how it is now? And how do the emerging scholars would manage their way in, putting up, because I mean, we as scholars always find there is a, disconnect between what the bureaucracy or the policymakers in the government are doing and what the scholars are really thinking over. So can we build up any, linkages on that side? Yeah.
Well, we can build up understanding in the way I said when we run into each other. It depends on understanding our point of view. But by and large, my very objective and very modest view, humble view is that the bureaucrats don't think that academics are capable of doing the job which they are doing. And they think the job which they are doing is the best way to do it, because they think, and they are right, that they have access to all the real information, whereas an academic doesn't have a real information. So there is not much respect to that extent so far as academic aspect is concerned. I mean, of late, in the last 10, 15 years, the bureaucracies have started realizing that there are limits on their knowledge and their working things, and they do things out of the jack. For instance, this blockade on Nepal, and I was in IDSA, Institute of Defence Studies and Analyses, and informally in the conferences or by calling me to some of the meetings, they asked me what should be done. And I said, don't do this, because this will damage India-Nepal relations for a very long time to come. But as you know, nobody listened to that. They had the blockade, and you have the consequences which you have seen, like this. Similarly, once, and I have written this in my book, so I can say it, Chandrika was visiting India and she called us for lunch, and me and Hardeep Puri, and we sat down, and she said she will have a peaceful resolution with the Tamil Tigers. And both of us said the LTT would not come on any negotiating table. They will put in their terms, and if you don't stick to their terms, they would not honor any kind of understanding. She still did not believe us. She went ahead, had the exchange of letters with them, and suddenly one day they attacked her. This. So what I'm saying is that in the understanding of an academic or someone who is not in the government and outside, there is always a gap. And I'm not saying that academics are always correct, but there are examples where bureaucracies and the policymakers react in a very sharp manner, react on the basis of information which is fed to them. They don't trust the information which academics are willing to share, either by writing or by talking to them. I have done 2-3 reports for the Ministry of External Affairs also. They asked us to write, but while writing to us, they said no access to the official documents. So we wrote largely on the publications available outside, and this is how it happened. So there is a gap between the two. And so far as, formal IFS diplomat and a non-career diplomat, again, they don't have much respect because they think they are not trained properly. Now, Geetaji, since you are a part of the JNU, I must tell you that they forget the fact that when before the Institute of Foreign Affairs was set up in Delhi, in India, all probationer diplomats were being sent to JNU. for I think 6 weeks course, 6 weeks or 6 months, 6 weeks, I think, where we taught them, we gave them papers, we had all kind of diplomatic and regional discussions with them. So to say that, and this is how we started contacting what is happening in the diplomacy, because you get to know these people year after year. We had for 6 weeks until this institute came, which is maybe last 20 years, but I'm talking of the period starting with 74, 75, when I was in JNU. So almost until the end of the 90s, we had a close contact year after year with the budding diplomats or probationers which came to us. And later on, they became senior. And therefore, they many times ministry asked us to give, for instance, on Indo-Nepal treaty, they wanted me to write a report, what is there, who is doing bad, who is doing good. So we do our effort and there is a contact. But, when chips are down,
Absolutely.
the academic opinion is not of great value to the policymaker. Economists are different, but in politics, in other areas, I think there is a divide.
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree because, when I see China as an example, the policymakers actually absorb what the scholars write and do, and they direct the scholars and researchers to work on a particular area and then absorb it into their, government. And I think that disconnect really needs to be, taken care of. But you were
just
yeah,
one more
please.
point, that the policymakers and bureaucrats don't have enough time to read our big reports and books.
Yes.
They are often influenced by the newspaper articles. And those academics, I have done that, probably you have also done that, those who go to print media or the electronic media, there the word reaches the policymakers. They may reject it, but otherwise there is no common ground. In fact, if you write a research paper in a journal, seldom, I'm not saying absolutely not, but seldom a bureaucrat would have access to it or have time to read it.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, so like coming back to the Nepal question, and because it's become very hot for India to look at what is happening in Nepal, and there's a lot of talk about the revival of monarchy, and you are the one who have really worked on all of these times when the monarchy was there and when the democratic processes have started. But how do you see today the voices of return of monarchy that are gaining ground in Kathmandu, and how do you see this as, and what is your opinion of what has caused this abrupt again sudden rise of calling monarchy back, or the reasons behind these voices that are coming as a revival?
The one obvious factor behind the revival of monarchy is the failure of the Republican leadership. I would not say Republican system, I would say Republican leadership. That unfortunately, corruption and malgovernance has been writ large. And corruption somehow I find in Asia, in South Asia, is a very common feature. Nepal has been a democracy only for last 17 years. Or since 2018, if 2008 or 2006, if you want it. That's not a very long period. And therefore, they have messed up. There is no doubt about that. And people are unhappy because people's expectations are growing. Their consciousness is growing. They are now more aware. They are more aspirational. So they want results immediately, and the governments are not willing to deliver it. And that is true almost with every government. I mean, in India, we are quite happy, but there are so many things. I mean, look at the farmers' problem, which is there. Look at the minority issues. Look at the, job market, whatever else. We are economically much better. And in last 10 years also, we have done quite well. But still our expectations are that it is not enough. So there is always a gap between delivery and your aspirations and expectations, which is building up in Nepal. There is no doubt that. Firstly, this is the main reason. So to my mind, the revival of monarchy actually is an expression of deep discontent with the way the Nepalese have been governed. And I think the king has taken that example to make the best of it. And then, unfortunately or unfortunately, there are constituencies in India these days. You know, India is a polarizing factor in Nepali politics. Without India's approval, probably approval or endorsement or quiet endorsement, the monarchy would not have been thrown out. I remember, and this is there in the book, and I have written elsewhere also, and everybody knows it, that on 3 occasions, Manmohan Singh told King Gyanendra to have the political parties on the board, then India would be able to help him fight the Maoist insurgency. India was not endorsing, I know it very well, despite all the allegations, that Indian bureaucracy and Indian policy makers have a total distrust for the communist of any type, and certainly of the Maoist type. So they were not going to touch them with a barge of poles, provided the king was willing to accommodate democratic system. In India's perception, a constitutional monarchy is best suited to Nepal. And constitutional monarchy has always been supported. You would recall for India's policy was 2-pillar policy, the democratic system and the constitutional monarchy. Unfortunately, the king in Nepal has not been constitutional all the time. And this is where the problem is. So now there is a constituency in India which finds it difficult to deal with the democratic politics there on the one hand, and on the other hand, compete with Chinese influence which is growing there. And they think, I think erroneously, that by just bringing the king, you will be able to settle both these problems. In fact, it is the monarchy which brought Pakistani influence in Nepal, which brought Chinese influence into Nepal, which even bought anti-aircraft guns to see if Nepal can be attacked by India and all that, which encouraged anti-India nationalism from the very beginning, not only by the Maoists, even much before that, the monarchy has been encouraging since 62 when King Mahendra took the coup. Therefore, there was no time when Indian system wanted a reigning monarchy or an authoritarian monarchy. But now there is a constituency in India politically which sees that by coming monarchy, we will be able to sort out all our problems in Nepal, and also Hinduism. So the two are linked up. Now people forget, when was monarchy in Nepal? Before 62, monarchy was constitutionally, it was not a Hindu state. It is only in 62 that monarchy brought in Hindu state, largely for its own legitimacy. Now people in India are asking for a Hindu Nepal, Hindu state in Nepal. So both Hindu state and revival of monarchy is linked up because there are constituencies in India which are also supporting it, particularly in Gorakhpur. And, the yogis' photographs were also on the demonstration in one way or the other. So it is that constituency support on the one hand and disenchantment with the Republican leaders, particularly Deva family, Prachanda and Oli. These are the 3 leaders. So if the Nepalese change their leadership, I think the monarchy movement would die out very soon. This is in my understanding. Even otherwise, the party supporting monarchy has only about, 10 seats or 8 seats or something
14,
like that?
14 seats. Yeah,
14 seats in the parliament, but 4th or 5th number.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there is no huge support for this constituency. And even otherwise, I mean, Oli and other leaders have said, and I said it long back when Gyanendra had taken over power in 2005. I said, let the king go become a political party and contest elections and assert his popularity. And he would have won hands down at that time if he had abdicated voluntarily. I said those because in many princely houses in India, gave up their princely thing and joined the Congress movement. And they became very popular leader. I mean, there's so many small, I mean, Gwalior Gharana, Rajasthan Gharana, in UP, Pratapgarh and others, there were many, many Rajas who joined the movement and they became big Congress leaders. So they could become, King Gyanendra would also become Prime Minister, maybe for 15 years, 20 years. But the popular support as it is had yet to be assessed. And what you see is mostly a Kathmandu-based protest movement, which is, of course, demonstrations are there in other towns and villages, but they are not huge and the popular support is still not there. So that's my view of the monarchy movement in Nepal at this stage.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, I agree. I have talks with some Nepalese people, and they're also talking about this, revival of monarchy or the constitutional monarchy. Many of the leaders are also talking about letting the king join the, mainstream politics and then contest the elections. But I don't see, that kind of, revival the people want. At least the kind of people who are on the protest ground, they're not demanding this. But many of the Nepalese think that Hindu Rashtra cannot be made in Nepal. The monarchy returning to Nepal is just not possible and all of that stuff. But, you mentioned certain things in your talk about the role of China as well as, the role of the West and even Pakistan. I mean, can you just elaborate a little bit on that, how that has played in terms of India-Nepal relations or Nepal's, domestic politics?
No, in Nepal, I feel India-Nepal relations, there are three critical deciding factors. One is the turbulent politics of Nepal. Because India is a polarizing factor in Nepali politics, there are always constituencies which like India and there are constituencies which do not like India because of the polarizing factor. The second factor is the way India deals with Nepal. And I think there is a lot of complacency and short-sightedness in dealing with Nepal, which roughs up Nepal's sensitivities and we spoil our relations. Blockade was just one reason. Not accepting their constitution was yet another reason. Their complaints earlier of micromanagement has always been there. Their complaints of delivery deficit, that projects are not being done quickly on trade matters. There are various issues on which they have problem. So this is a second factor, how India deals with Nepal. And the third factor is the role of external factors. Now, in terms of external factors, during the Cold War, US was interested in having a foothold in Nepal, and until 1958 or so. And I know that 55, 54, even black flag demonstrations were done against Nehru. And I later on found out in my research through verbal conversations that the USI had funded some part of it. And you know that during the early years of Cold War, the US did not like India because India was not willing to join them in containing China. And we were having peaceful relations. So there was a lot of misunderstanding between the two. So during that time, US role was there to keep India and the US, India and Nepal at distance with each other rather than getting close to each other. And if you look at India-Nepal history, India-Nepal relations started becoming tense after the death of King Tribhuvan, and from 55, 56 onwards. And then China also came in at that time. So it was US earlier, then came Pakistan. And you would recall the hijacking of a plane from Nepal, Indian plane from Nepal, which was taken to Kandahar and Kabul and various other, the serious crisis which that plane hijacking created about it. So Pakistan became a factor. Now people are talking about a lot of madrasas and Islamic influence and role of ISIS, and it has been talked about. And now after Xi Jinping, particularly the role of China, because China's role earlier in Nepal was of a distant friend and neighbor who was ready to come to Nepal's assistance whenever Nepal called them. but not on its own. But from Xi Jinping's time, or little before that, I would say, China has its own interest in whole of South Asia, and Nepal is one of them. One of the main reason is the Tibet and Xinjiang areas, which are periphery of China, border all the South Asian countries. And if China wants to develop and stabilize them and consolidate its position there, it needs the cooperation of the neighboring countries of these peripheral regions. And this is where they are investing in Afghanistan. This is where they are investing in Central Asia. This is where they're investing in Pakistan. This is where they are investing in Nepal. This is where they want to have relations with Bhutan. This is where they want to have good relations or total influence in Myanmar. So, you see this. And now on Indian Ocean, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Maldives, they are all part of the Indian Ocean. So China has its own interest in South Asia. And for all the South Asian students and the Chinese students, I keep saying one thing, that look, South Asia is 1.7 billion people, 1.7, 1.6 billion people, you can have the exact figure, growing at the rate of 5.5 or 6%. There is no other region in the world, Geetaji, which is growing at this rate with such a huge population. So the potential of development and potential of investment is huge. Though South Asia is not very developed. When it gets developed, its market potential will grow. But even at this stage, this is the largest, most attractive potential market. And that's why you see a lot of interest in South Asia these days, by almost every country, by Europe, by Australia, by US, anybody, by Africa, anybody. So why should China be not interested? It is also in China's neighborhood. And China would like to have its economic presence and economic stay in South Asia. Therefore, today, if a particular country in South Asia tell the Chinese, no, keep away, they will not keep away because they have their own interests. So we have billions of dollars promises from China in the name of BRI, though some of the projects are very difficult and unrealistic projects. Like, I don't know if you know about the, project early study report of the rail line from Kaste to Kathmandu, which is coming up. I am told that the preliminary report says that almost 80% of that rail line will come through the tunnels. And those tunnels will not have enough of stations and enough of people to board them. So economically, this is not a viable project. And it is a project of huge expenditure, for which China better than I do, for which there has been a lot of debate on BRI within China, that some of the projects are not economically viable and still they are being pursued in one form or the other. Therefore, the Chinese interests are huge in Nepal, and they will contest anybody. They will contest US. Don't forget again, US funded the Khampa revolt in China, in Tibet, during 50s, late 50s or 60s to end of the 80s, and to the 70s when China and US had friendship. Then only those CIA operations were ceased. The Chinese are aware of it, that US can create problem for them in Tibet. And if US and India join hands, it can create problems for them. So they would like to contest and compete with it. So I find that China has its own interest to make its economic and strategic presence not only in Nepal, but in all the other South Asian countries. That's why, they are taking Nepal to the Himalayan network, connectivity network, which they are trying to make, and link up Nepal with Pakistan and Afghanistan, with which Nepal has nothing in common. But they still want to do it. So this is how the external, and because of these stakes which China has today in Nepal, again, you are a better scholar of the Chinese affairs, you will see that China, which earlier never interfered into the internal domestic politics, now is greatly present even in Nepal's domestic politics. It tries to bring the communist parties together. It funds the Nepali Congress. It funds the media. It funds all kind of non-governmental organizations. Cultural institutions have been set up there. So all this is an indication that Chinese have stakes in Nepal and Chinese have stakes in all of India's neighbors, including in India. Because they have problems with India, they will be more interested in the neighbors to be present there. And therefore, you have this competition and rivalry, if you want to call it.
But how do you see, I mean, I'm just pushing a little more on that, is how do you see when in 2015, Sushma Swaraj ji was having a meeting with the Chinese counterpart in Kathmandu, and they proposed 2+1 in the sense, the two big powers, India and China, will cooperate and not compete in these small neighbors. And of course, the Nepalese were objecting onto that. I mean, saying that we have not been, a part of this whole negotiation deal. So do you think there is a possibility of, in any sense, when China has its interest, India has its interest, of these two big powers cooperating in the neighborhood and not having competing or rivalry positions, so to say?
There is an English saying that when elephants fight or elephants make love, the grass is trampled. The grass below them. The smaller things are when the big things, and Nepal says that Nepal is a tarul between the two Dhungas, the Nepal and India and China. So if India and China have love affairs like in 50s, there was no problem for Nepal-India relations. And when China and India had tensions with the 60s, there were all kind of problems we have started seeing here. So it doesn't matter. I mean, China is interested, not only during Sushma Swaraj. Today, Jaishankar and Wang Yi are also saying the same thing. Even I think 2-3 days back, President Xi said the same thing and Modi said the same thing. So yes, India and China will want to have normal relations with themselves, but that would not affect their strategic stakes in the neighborhood of India. India would also like to preserve its neighborhood, and for the reasons I mentioned to you, China would want to get into South Asia as deeply as possible. You recall BCIM, Bangladesh, China, India, Myanmar. They wanted to link Yunnan with the neighboring countries. And India was not enthusiastic even till today. It is not enthusiastic about BCIM. Now, apply the same from Yunnan to Tibet and Xinjiang. Today, the Chinese and Pakistani armed forces are guarding Xinjiang border because of the security problems there. Therefore, the stakes which China today has in South Asia are real, concrete, and very powerful. And no matter what kind of an equation they have with India, they would like to be present there. And this will make India uncomfortable. No doubt what kind of relationship they have with China. So the undercurrent of competition, even with the best of bilateral relations between India and China, would not evaporate.
Yeah, well said. I mean, the strategic interests of both countries are going to be overlapping, and it's not going to be very easy for both of these countries to really go together. So the dragon elephant dance or the tango they're talking about is not going to be as smooth as it should be.
Not for the smaller countries. Not for the smaller countries.
Yes, not for the. So last word for our budding scholars and researchers who want to work on South Asia, and what is that you would want to give them as a guide or as a lesson that your experience from this whole journey has been, or what they should be looking at? Just last word for that.
Well, I think South Asia is in a big turmoil and big changes. It's all the systems all the countries you see are unstable and troublesome. You see Bangladesh, you see Sri Lanka, you see Maldives. The governments are not stable after the changes are coming up. India looks very stable, but India has got into this, religious and caste issues in a very bad way, but they have to resolve it. So I find India is far more stable, but other countries are far more turbulent. And one has to see this gap between aspirations. What happened in Sri Lanka? When economic crisis came, it was a gap between aspirations and the delivery of the state, the way it was being done. What happened in Bangladesh? Therefore, I think one area which needs to be closely watched is the gap between aspiring societies of South Asia and the achievements or delivery of those aspirations and expectations by the governments. And one will have to work on this equation. Secondly, on foreign policies, the whole world is under turbulence and region is under turbulence. There is a China-US competition which is there. The supply chains are being disrupted. There are wars in India. There is India-China competition, all said and done, normalization, whatever else it is happening. We'll have South Asia is the anchor of Indian Ocean, which is the main region of politics. The whole Indo-Pacific concept envelops South Asia, which is turbulent. So on foreign policy issues, how to meet these challenges? There are mutual conflicts and contradictions, and how will countries manage this contradiction? How will Nepal manage India-China and US-China contradictions? How will Sri Lanka manage the same contradiction? How will Bangladesh manage? They are all, seeing the difficulties. All of them are visiting China, and all of them are accepting the US proposals, MCC, for example, which were there. So you will have on foreign policy, this is a major area to work, how to meet and cope with the challenges coming from regional and extra-regional forces and their contradictions.
Okay, sir, it was great pleasure talking and listening to you. I can just go on and on listening to your experiences and your work and get more knowledge, but we have a limited time in this, and we don't want our podcast to be too long for people not to listen to it.
Yes.
So we can continue our interactions, and thank you very much for taking your precious time out and talking for our viewers. And to our viewers, please hit the like icon and subscribe to our channel for many more such interesting discussions and insights to what are the experiences and learnings of scholars and practitioners. Thank you very much. Namaskar.
Pleasure. Namaskar.